The Las Vegas Raiders have sent a very loud message to Antonio Pierce after firing Luke Getsy and two other coaches. The message is simple. If the Raiders don't start winning football games, then Antonio Pierce is not going to have a job in 2025. I'm Mitchel Renz, host of the Raiders Report, and coming up here on today's show, I am going to tell you the message from Mark Davis to Antonio Pierce because it is clear as day. AP's got to figure it out or else he's going to be looking for a new job next season. If you missed the three coaches that got fired, believe me, I was asleep last night too. I got a phone call from Jeremy Chuggs. Hell, I was half asleep when I was even talking about some of the news. But the Silver and Black fired Luke Getsy, their offensive coordinator. They decided to move on from quarterback coach Rich Scangarello, and they also decided to move on from offensive line coach James Cregg. I don't care what time it is. I don't care what day of the week it is. I don't take days off. And if you want to stay up to date going on everything around the Las Vegas Raiders, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications because I know this. I heard Antonio Pierce say to the media today that he's given his team the entire week off to be able to regain their thoughts. You know what I wouldn't do? I wouldn't give my entire team an entire week off after you just fired somebody. I have commitment to excellence. Raiders Report, commitment to excellence. Jeremy Chuggs, commitment to excellence. The Nation, commitment to excellence. And if you believe that this team deserves better, hit that subscribe button. I promise you, nobody's going to keep you up to date. So the message that is being sent here, I know Antonio Pierce said that he was the person that decided to move on from Luke Getsy. Sure. That's fine. I'll tell you where the real message came from. The real message came from Mark Davis. And if Antonio Pierce doesn't realize that his seat is about as hot as it's going to get, then he needs to figure it out because this team needs to start winning. You are 2-7. How this team ever beat the Baltimore Ravens might go down as one of the craziest games in NFL history that nobody gives a shit about. But now you've lost 5 straight games. You beat a Ravens team by the grace of God. How, again, no idea. You took care of business against a Cleveland Browns team, but if you actually go back and look at that game, you had to get a little bit lucky, a few calls that went your way, like, I don't know, an 80-yard touchdown, Amari Cooper being brought back. So you beat another team that's regarded as one of the worst teams in the NFL. This team legitimately looks like one of the worst teams, if not the worst team, on both sides of the football, and players and fans are starting to lose faith in the coaching staff. That's one of the biggest reasons why the Raiders decided to move on from Luke Getsy late last night, to move on from Rich Scangarello, to move on from James Cregg. But one of the things that I don't understand is why did Antonio Pierce even hire these guys in the first place? When you bring in people that fail and get fired from their previous jobs, and then you expect a different result, that's absolutely insane to me. Let's go to another reason here of what the message is from Mark Davis. The Raiders wouldn't fire 3 coaches if they were tanking. I have wondered, are the Raiders tanking? I'm sure a lot of you have wondered, are the Raiders tanking? Based on some of the coaching decisions that we have seen, Antonio Pierce, Luke Getsy, hell, this entire coaching staff make you go and you're like, they got to be tanking, right? Like there's no way that you're this bad at doing your job. There's no way that this team is this bad, right? Right? Well, here's the thing. Mark Davis doesn't think that this team is that bad. Mark Davis doesn't think that this team should be tanking. And Mark Davis wants to be able to figure out if Antonio Pierce is the right guy because now you don't have Luke Getsy as a fall guy. We no longer have Rich Scangarello, who now has been fired in 7 straight jobs. You don't have him as a fall guy. James Cregg, you don't have him as a fall guy. This all goes on to Antonio Pierce because, again, you're not firing 3 coaches at this point right before your bye week if you think that this team is tanking. The next thing that Mark Davis expects is for Antonio Pierce to win, and he's got 8 games to do it in order to save his job. I know that going into the season, I was like, man, I don't see that there's any way in hell AP could be on the hot seat. But I also said if the Raiders go into the season, especially at their bye week, and they have 2 wins or worse, that seat's going to be cranked up. You can go back and you can watch the videos this offseason. And he's got 8 games left. You got the Miami Dolphins on the road. And then you got the AFC West, Denver Broncos. Then you got another road game on Black Friday against the Chiefs at Tampa Bay, Atlanta, Jacksonville, New Orleans. And then you're going to finish the season up with the Los Angeles Chargers. This is not an easy slate of games, but you have 8 games left. And this is going to be the pinned comment on today's show. How many games will the Raiders win this season? Because this answer right here will dictate whether or not Antonio Pierce has a job next season. I'm going to give you my answer after this YouTube ad break, but while that ad is playing, I want you to scroll on down and please give me your answer. I think that the Raiders might win 1 more game. And that's a might, and that is a big-time question mark. Does Getsy deserve a lot of blame? No question about it. Is the offense going to be better probably without Getsy calling plays? I like to think so because I can't imagine that anybody is worse than Luke Getsy. But then we also got to be able to look ourselves in the mirror. Antonio Pierce has to look himself in the mirror because, yes, the Raiders' offense was bad against Cincinnati. But the defense also gave up 41 points, and quite frankly, I think it could have been even a little bit worse. Hell, the offense yesterday was bad. The defense has been bad. This is a bad coach team from top to bottom, and the only way that Antonio Pierce is going to keep his job is if this team starts winning games. So I'm looking at the Miami game. I'm looking at the Jacksonville game. I'm looking at the New Orleans game, a Saints team that also just fired their head coach in Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen has been fired 2 times. Both when his quarterback was Derek Carr. Coming up here, why firing Getsy was good long-term for the Las Vegas Raiders. Because I know that a lot of people, which I kind of find funny, and I know I don't really blame you. This season's basically over. It is over. And a lot of people this morning are like, man, we should have kept Luke Getsy because we want to have the number 1 overall pick. And the more that you keep Getsy, the better chance you have in a higher draft pick is. I hear you. But you also got to be able to build for the long term. You also got to be able to evaluate for the long term. And I'll tell you why firing Getsy is good for the long term. Before I get into that, though, today's show sponsor is Game Time. If you plan on going to a Raiders game, bless your heart. You might as well get some awesome deals on some tickets as well. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code CHATSPORTS, that's CHATSPORTS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. I love the Game Time picks. This is where you're going to be able to see the best seats from the app, whether you want to go to a Vegas Golden Knights game, which quite frankly, I almost recommend that you guys doing that instead of going to a Las Vegas Raiders game. If you do want to go to the Raiders game against Denver, which my favorite way to look at the tickets, and you can kind of see what I got up here, click. I have the Game Time picks clicked. I also have the all-in pricing. That way that when I go to checkout, whatever the price is right here, which I can't really see very well, $389, $369, nice. When you go to checkout, it's going to be $369. That's what the all-in pricing shows. That's what the Game Time picks. It's going to be able to break down the best seats available to you, whatever event. But if you're like, Mitch, I already got my Raiders tickets. I need to put a smile on my face because this team doesn't do it on Sundays. Well, then I really recommend Game Time because I think it's the perfect app for people that are planning on going out to Las Vegas. There is so much to do in Vegas. And the longer and longer you wait right before an event, you're going to be able to get better ticket prices, and that's just because the tickets, they drop closer and closer that the event gets. So if you're paying attention, which I hope that you are, download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code CHATSPORTS. Jeremy Chugs has went ahead and put that link for you guys down in the comments, down in the description. Don't waste his time. Don't waste yours either. Code CHATSPORTS. Shout out to Game Time. So coming up here, why Getsy firing is good for the long term, because I understand that there's a lot of people, again, that are like, damn it, we can't even tank the right way. And I get it, man. I was live last night. I heard a lot of the comments in here. But I do think, though, the reason why it's good is because now you get to fully evaluate Antonio Pierce more. Where if you don't have Luke Getsy as the fall guy, and I wanted Antonio Pierce to be the head coach. I'm not afraid to admit that. I think a lot of people did, but it's looking like that was a bad decision. So now you get the opportunity to evaluate him and see what he does without Luke Getsy at OC. He's going to be coaching for his job, and it was reported late last night that Scott Turner was expected to take over the play calling duties, though early this morning when Antonio Pierce spoke to the media, he did say that no offensive coordinator or play caller has been named, and he's going to take 24 to 48 hours to be able to figure it out. But if the Raiders don't look inspired after the bye week, I think that's really bad news for AP. You got a whole week, and I know that it's very typical that coaches give their entire team off for 1 week, and then they come back the following week, and they hit the ground running. Antonio Pierce did say that this team's dealing with a lot of injuries, and they are dealing with a lot of injuries. And I'm not really sitting up here expecting them to go out and practice on their off week. People deserve an off week. Players deserve an off day or two. I get it. But when you've lost 5 straight games, and you just fired 3 coaches and your job is on the line, I think that you need to do a better job of a head coach to be able to look those players in the eyes and go, What are we going to do? Are we going to come out after the bye week, play inspired football, or are we just going to keep doing what we're doing? Because if we keep doing what we're doing, a lot of people here are going to start losing their jobs. Let's go to the next reason why I think firing Getsy was a good thing. The Raiders don't believe in tanking, and to me, it's a reassuring thing to the fan base, where I know how frustrated this season has been. I know how frustrated last season was. I know how frustrated the last 20-something years have been. But I don't think that good things can be built by tanking. And sometimes when you do tank, it's not even a guarantee that you're going to get the quarterback that you want. The Raiders wouldn't fire 3 coaches if they thought that they did not have a team at least built to win. And I'll be frank with you, I don't know if this team is built to win. You got the worst quarterback room in the NFL. You have a bad running back room. Your offensive line is banged up. It's terrible. Your defense right now has been struggling. But to me, if Mark Davis is not happy and he wants answers and he wants to figure out what the problem is, I think that he knows that he made a bold decision in hiring Antonio Pierce to be the head coach. Well, now we went ahead and made another bold decision telling AP that he's got to do something because the ticket sales are down. Raider fans are down bad. Like, I followed this team for a long time. Last season when the Raiders had Josh McDaniels, I felt like the fan base was more into it last season than what they are right now. And I think that speaks volumes to Antonio Pierce, or speaks volumes to Mark Davis, who fired McDaniels last season right before the Raiders bye, and the season got turned around. So I think what they're doing is they go back and they look and they go, well, if it worked last season with AP, maybe we can get it going this season with Antonio Pierce. I will admit this, though. I made this video last week, and I had a lot of people that got upset with me, and I said that the Raiders will fire Antonio Pierce if this continues in Las Vegas. One of the things that I mentioned is AP will get fired if Luke Getsy remains OC. So I am happy that the Raiders listened and the Raiders moved on from Getsy. But I also said in that video, and if you don't believe me, go check it out. It's going to be in the links down in the comments and in the description of the show, that a lot of coaches and a lot of players were upset with this coaching staff. We're upset with Antonio Pierce, the fact that AP put a lot of blame on the players and said execution instead of pointing the finger at this coaching staff and at Luke Getsy. I said that last week. A lot of people got upset with me, the fact that I said it. But remember, last year I also said the exact same thing. People were upset with Josh McDaniels. A week later, they ended up getting fired. When players, when coaching staff tell me that type of shit, I hope people start listening, because it's very clear that when people get that upset and come talk to me about it, that it's already really, really starting to get loud up there for Mark Davis. Now, I know a lot of people didn't watch that video. The people that I know did are always a part of the Noti gang. Shout out to MVS, GBL, Carls Gruger, Roger Chandler, and Anthony Aguirre. Those are some real ones out there. What is a real one? What is the Noti gang? People that are subscribed, people that got those notifications turned on, and people that try to get in the comments first when I drop a video. If you want to see your name on a future show, subscribe, join the Noti gang. Let's go to why firing Getsy was good for the Raiders, and this is the final reason. The firing is the Raiders admitting it was a bad hire. And sometimes you need to be able to do that. There's nothing that grinds my gear more when you get a head coach that steps up to the podium and is not afraid to point the finger, but isn't afraid to take some of the blame. And Pierce, he was hired in January to be the head coach. And I know AP is a defensive-minded guy, and there's a lot of people out there like, oh, Mitch, you can't put the blame on AP. He's only doing with what he's got. But Antonio Pierce also hired Luke Getsy. And if you don't want to hear that from me, you can hear it from a lot of the beat reporters out there yesterday, Vincent Bonsignor, and you can say what you want about Vinny. Vinny is very well tied in with that organization, said that Antonio Pierce had full autonomy when hiring the staff. It was AP's decision to hire Luke Getsy. It was AP's decision to hire Rich Scangarello. It was AP's decision to hire James Cregg. So if you know your job as a head coach is to be able to put together a staff that puts you in the best place to win and the best place to succeed, Mark Davis needs to see if Antonio Pierce can do it now over the back half of this season. If AP can show that, you know what, it was just Luke Getsy, that we can get inspired football from Scott Turner. But the Raiders saying, you know what, that's on us, and it's not on the players, I think sometimes needs to happen. Does it need also, do the players need to play better? Yes, of course that they do. But this is a team that's built by Telesco, that was built by Antonio Pierce, and this is the product that's on the field. That is concerning, and there's no doubt about that. So coming up here, let's talk about how Antonio Pierce can save his job. Because if the season keeps going like this, AP's not going to be employed the same way Luke Getsy's not going to be employed. So how can AP save his job? The first thing is, needs to start to manage games better. He needs to show his players, he needs to show his fan base that when the time is at its biggest moment, the coach can step up to the plate. Sometimes even just in the simplest forms, coach needs to step up to the plate. I'm talking timeouts. I'm talking formations. I'm talking offense, defense. AP needs to manage the game better. What about the next thing? He needs to regain some of that trust in the locker room. I am telling you flat out, a lot of players, a lot of coaches lost faith in AP over the course of, I'm going to say, the last 2 weeks. And I think that when you fire Getsy, it's them trying to repatch this up a little bit. But AP said that he's not going to let outside noise, interfere with the locker room. And I know right now I am a part of that outside noise. But I am also the noise that is upset because sometimes you got to raise your voice, you got to scream, you got to be willing to do things that you don't want to do to make change. And we finally got some change with them firing Luke Getsy. The next thing that the Raiders need to do, you got to find an identity. Teams take on the identity of their head coach, and right now the Raiders do not have one because your head coach has got his tail tucked between his legs, and I think you saw that on Monday's press conference as well. The Raiders need to find an identity. They got 8 games to do it. If they can do it, it might help save his job. The offense needs to show some growth. You're not going to win many games in the NFL when you can't get to 20 points consistently. And the Raiders' offense this season has really failed to hit 20 points this season. Hell, AP joked about trying to get to 24 in the offseason. I think that everybody right here would put a hole in their pants if the Raiders got to 24 points on their own. It just doesn't happen. But, Mitch, we got 24 yesterday. You got a pick 6 from Jack Jones. The offense stinks. Offense needs to show growth. That's also on Antonio Pierce. And the final thing is, and it's not rocket science, you got to win games. If you can't win games, if you can't show that you're at least a competent team, if you look like the worst team in the NFL, that falls on the head coach's shoulders. And the Raiders right now legitimately look like the worst team in the NFL. I know if the draft were to be today, they'd have the number 5 overall pick. And they're going to get their opportunities to get higher in the draft. Quite frankly, it wouldn't shock me if they finish the season with the number 1 overall pick. And if they do finish with the top 5 pick, AP's gone. They're going to try to bring in somebody else, whether it's Mike Vrabel, maybe it's a Ben Johnson. They're going to bring in somebody else. So if AP wants to save his job, he's got to do all those 5 things because the message was clear when they fired Luke Getsy. AP figured it out or else you're next.